Aliens shamed Earth in open council. By dawn, all treaties were ash. The chair scraped the floor when I sat down, and 46 alien species turned to look at me. Not at Earth's seat. At me. At the woman who had just carried a thermos of real coffee into the most powerful legislative chamber in the known galaxy, set it on the table without ceremony, and then opened a briefing packet like she had somewhere more important to be afterward. I am Ambassador Dara Ose Mensa. I have been in this chamber for 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days. I know because I count things. I count them the way other people check their pulse, quietly, automatically, as a way of confirming that time is still passing and that I am still inside it. 41 overhead lighting panels in the conclave chamber, each one a pale, specific shade of blue that the Valorian architects chose because their species finds it calming. Nobody asked what humans find calming. Nobody asked what humans need. The chair I sit in was designed by a committee that had never met a human being and had worked entirely from biological specifications submitted by Earth's first contact delegation, which means it is almost right, and therefore slightly wrong, in a way that I notice every single day and have never mentioned. I brought my own coffee, because the conclave's communal beverage service offers 37 options, none of which contain caffeine, and several of which are mildly hallucinogenic to human biology in ways that the health documentation describes as perceptual variation events, which is diplomatic language for the time that Junior Attaché Owen Gareth drank the wrong thing at the welcome reception and spent 40 minutes convinced that the Arathi clustermind was speaking directly into his spine. He was wrong. The Arathi do not communicate that way. Probably. The point is, I brought coffee. I set it down. I opened my packet, and around me the chamber filled with the sounds and frequencies and soft harmonic signatures of 46 species, settling in for a session that was supposed to be routine. It was not going to be routine. I had known since the shuttle docked. There is a thing that happens in diplomatic spaces when something is being kept from the person who is supposed to know, a very specific quality of not looking, not hostility. Hostility you can work with. Hostility has direction and energy. This was its opposite. This was the careful, coordinated, slightly too casual avoidance of eye contact that you only achieve when a group of people has agreed, before you arrived, that they would not look at you. The Valorian delegation had not looked at me since I walked through the door. In 3 years, Councillor Thav had made eye contact with me exactly 112 times. I know because I counted those too. He makes eye contact when he wants something. He makes eye contact when he is establishing a point of dominance. He makes eye contact when I have said something that amuses him, which happens less often than I would like, but more often than he intends to allow. Today, from the moment I entered to the moment I sat down, his gaze had moved across the room in patterns that carefully excluded my section of the table. His neck plates were blue-green. Blue-green, in 3 years of informal study, means satisfaction. Specifically, the satisfaction of a plan that is already in motion. I opened my briefing packet to the trade route renegotiation summary. 40 pages. I had read it 4 times. My assistant, Owen Gareth, had flagged 3 clauses favorable to Earth's shipping interests, and I had agreed with his assessment, and I had come into this session with what I can only describe as cautious professional optimism, which is the most dangerous state a diplomat can be in, because it requires the most painful readjustment when it turns out to be wrong. I counted the overhead panels again. Still 41. Thav stood. He did not request the floor. In 3 years, I had watched 216 floor requests processed in this chamber, and every single one followed the same protocol. Signal the chair, receive acknowledgement, rise. Thav simply rose, the way objects of sufficient mass simply alter the gravity of a room by existing in a new configuration, and the chamber quieted around him without needing to be told. His neck plates had shifted, not blue-green anymore. Gold. Gold means performance. Gold means he has practiced this. In 3 years, I had seen Thav's neck plates go gold 4 times, and 3 of those times it preceded a statement that permanently altered the political landscape of at least 2 species' futures. He began to speak. I will not reconstruct his entire statement. I am a diplomat, not a stenographer, and more importantly, the full text is in the official chamber record. where it will remain until the conclave decides to revise its own history, or the station's data cores degrade, whichever comes first. What I will tell you is the architecture of it, because the architecture is the point. He began with data, real data, drawn from real sources, organized with a care that told me immediately that this had not been assembled quickly or impulsively. Someone had spent weeks on this. Multiple someones, probably, because the formatting was too consistent to be one person's work, and the gaps were too deliberate to be accidental. Earth's economic output, ranked against galactic averages, 39th. He presented this neutrally, the way you present a fact that speaks for itself, because you have chosen not to dignify it with adjectives. Earth's technological development rate, measured from the baseline established at first contact, 42nd. He noted that the galactic average for a species at our stage of spacefaring development was significantly higher, and that Earth had closed approximately 12% of the gap in 40 years, which was, he acknowledged, a pace of improvement. He said this the way you acknowledge that someone managed to run a mile, before noting that the race was already over. Earth's military projection capacity, assessed using the Arathi Threat Matrix, 44th. He spent the most time here. The Arathi Threat Matrix is the most widely accepted standard for evaluating whether a species is capable of meaningful self-defense, or, more relevantly, meaningful threat to others. Earth ranked 44th. He presented 14 supporting data points. He presented supplementary analysis. He presented a chart, which appeared on every diplomatic terminal in the room simultaneously, because someone had arranged in advance for this presentation to have visual aids. Earth's biological adaptability scores. We were second. He spent 11 seconds on this before moving forward. 11 seconds. I was writing in the margin of my briefing packet when he said it. I looked down after he had moved on to the next metric. I had written the word enough, 17 times. My handwriting is usually very controlled. On the 17th repetition, the letters were pressed harder into the paper than the first, but they were still legible, still even. I noticed this and found it either encouraging or alarming, depending on how you feel about self-control as a survival mechanism. He concluded, after 42 minutes, with a phrase that my translator rendered as, "The error the galaxy is still correcting." He sat down. His neck plates were blue-green again. The chamber was as quiet as 46 species can collectively be, which is not silence in any human sense but is the closest they come to it. It lasted for 3 seconds. Then the small sounds resumed, shifts of position, breath equivalents, the ambient frequencies of beings returning from concentrated attention to distributed awareness. Nobody looked at me. The vote on the trade route renegotiation was called. Every species abstained, not opposed, not for any formal objection or proposed amendment or request for further review. Abstained, which means nothing is blocked. Abstentions do not block, but nothing passes either. And in the language of this chamber, an abstention on a measure that has been in negotiation for 3 years is not a procedural outcome. It is a message. It is 46 species deciding simultaneously that this particular item is no longer worth engaging with. 3 years of work, 40 pages of briefing material, Owen's 3 flagged clauses, 6 seconds of collective silence. The session continued. There were 4 more items on the agenda, and I sat through all of them with my hands flat on the table, and my coffee going cold, and my notes from the trade route renegotiation open in front of me like a document I was still considering, rather than what it actually was, which was an artifact of a conversation that had just ended without me. When the session closed, the chamber emptied with the specific efficiency of 46 species that have somewhere else to be. I sat for a moment while they filed out, not because I needed to collect myself. I have sat in many rooms after many bad moments, and I know that the collection happens later, privately, after the part where you perform fine. I sat because I was watching Thav leave. He passed within 4 feet of me. His neck plates were the pale, contented white of a being that has completed a task to its own satisfaction. He did not look at me. He did not slow down. He moved through the space between my chair and the exit corridor, with the smooth, unhurried pace of someone who has nothing left to do in this room. I counted the distance between us. 4 feet. And 40 years of diplomatic relationship. And every meal eaten at joint sessions and every agreement signed and every moment of actual connection across the species gap that I had chosen to believe was something real, was something being built, was something that the next generation of diplomats and the one after them would inherit as a foundation. 4 feet. I picked up my coffee. Still warm, barely. I drank it, and I stood up and I walked out of the chamber, and Owen was in the corridor with his face doing the specific thing that faces do when a 26-year-old with good instincts and too much empathy knows something has gone very wrong and has not yet decided how to say it. I saved him from having to decide. "Get me a secure line to Accra," I said. "Then get me the authorization protocols for the diplomatic archive system. Then find the pepper whiskey." He opened his mouth. "Owen," I said. "I was there. I know what happened. I need the line, the protocols, and the whiskey, in that order, with no questions in between." He nodded. He pulled out his communications device. He began walking with me toward the residence wing, and I let myself be walked, because sometimes the most useful thing a person can do for you is simply keep pace. The corridor was 240 meters long, amberstone, Valorian quarried, transported here specifically because authority should have weight and warmth simultaneously, should feel like something that has always been here, and will always be here, and has no need to justify its own existence to anything that walks through it. I had walked this corridor 312 times. I knew every join in the stone, every place the grain shifted, every panel. I did not count them now. That was the sign. When I stop counting, something has changed in me that is not the small change of a bad afternoon or a failed negotiation. Something older. Something that my mother would recognize in my face before I opened my mouth, which is why I needed to call her first. I walked the amber corridor and I thought about gold neck plates, and 11 seconds spent on second place, and a word written 17 times in the margins of a 40-page briefing document. By the time I reached the residence wing door, I had stopped thinking about all of it. There is a place past anger that is not peace. It is not calm either. Not the kind of calm that comes from resolution or acceptance. It is the specific stillness of a decision that has not yet been spoken out loud, but is fully formed, entirely certain, waiting only for the machinery of action to catch up to it. I had been in that place before. Not many times. 4, maybe 5. The kind of moments you can count, because each one rearranged what came after it. I recognized the shape of it. I went inside. Owen slid the secure line code under my door within 3 minutes, which is fast, and told me he was shaken enough to move quickly, rather than correctly, because correctly would have been to hand it to me personally and confirm receipt. I did not tell him this. I opened the line. I called my mother first. She answered on the second ring. She did not ask me what happened. She has watched enough of my career from the other side of a communications line to have developed an accurate sense of when asking is useful and when it is not. She asked if I had eaten. I said yes. I had eaten at lunch. I was not thinking about food. She said good. That was the whole call. 2 sentences. From the woman who taught me to count things under pressure, who sat with me the night before every exam and every interview and every departure, who has never once told me that the thing I was walking into was too large or too difficult or not for me. 2 sentences, because she knew that the call was not for information and was not for comfort in the conventional sense. The call was to hear her voice answer on the second ring, to confirm that the world I came from still existed and was still reachable, before I did what I was going to do next. I poured 2 fingers of pepper whiskey. I called General Haruto Mase. Haruto Mase does not sound different at 2 in the morning than he does at noon. I have known him for 9 years. I have called him at every possible hour and in every possible condition, and the voice that answers is always the same, level, contained, slightly dry, like a man who made peace a long time ago with the fact that his phone would ring at bad times, and decided to simply stop treating any time as bad. He picked up on the first ring. I read him the exact text of Thav's statement, all 42 minutes of it, which I had compressed during the session into the 6 lines that carried the actual weight, the rankings, the conclusion, the phrase the translator had rendered, as the error the galaxy is still correcting. I had written those 6 lines in the margin of my briefing packet, below the 17 repetitions of the word enough, in the small and careful handwriting I use when I am making a record rather than taking a note. I read them aloud. I did not editorialize. I did not add context. I gave him the words exactly as they had been spoken, Because Haruto is a man who needs the raw material, and not the summary, who needs to hear the precise language before he can determine what it means for the things he is responsible for. He was silent for 11 seconds when I finished. I counted. "Is this official chamber record?" he said. "Yes," I said, verbatim, logged and time-stamped by the chamber systems, witnessed by 46 council representatives and their staff. "Good," he said. That was the whole call. One word. But in 9 years of knowing Haruto Mase, I have learned to hear the things he puts into the words he chooses, which are never many. Good, in Haruto's vocabulary, has a range. There is the good of routine confirmation, which is brief and final. There is the good of minor approval, which has a slight upward inflection. And then there is the good I heard on that call, which was the good of a man who has been waiting for something to become official, who has been quietly preparing for a conversation that could only begin once certain things were on the record, who heard what I read to him and understood that the record now existed and that what came next was no longer preparation. I had trusted Haruto Mase 9 years ago when he was a colonel, and I was a first-year diplomatic staff member on a mission to Arathi space that went sideways in ways the briefing documents had not accounted for. He had made 3 decisions in rapid sequence that were each individually questionable and collectively exactly right, and I had watched him make them with the specific quality of attention I give to people when I am deciding whether they are the kind of person you can call at 2 in the morning on an encrypted channel and say everything in one sentence. He is that kind of person. I hung up. I poured the second finger of whiskey. The third call was to Secretary General Adisa Omotunde, and I say third, but it was really more of a continuation, because Adisa was already on a separate channel that his office had opened to my line, approximately 40 seconds before I called him, which meant he had been waiting for me to finish with Haruto, which meant he already knew everything that had happened in the conclave chamber today. Which is exactly what Adisa Omotunde always knows. Everything. Before the person it happened to has finished processing it. He has been Secretary General for 11 years. Before that, he was Chief Intelligence Coordinator for the Earth Galactic Liaison Bureau, which is the organization responsible for collecting and analyzing information from every source in known space that is willing to talk to humanity, and several that are not aware they are doing so. He built the network. He knows it because he made it. And the first thing he did when he became Secretary General was ensure that the network still reported to him personally on matters he defined as critical, which is everything. "What do you need?" he said. No preamble, no description of what had happened, no expression of outrage or solidarity, or the diplomatic shock that his public statement would include tomorrow, just the question, because Adisa has learned, in 11 years, that I do not call at this hour to describe my problems. I call to solve them, and what he can give me is resources, and the question of what resources are needed is the only relevant question. 12 hours, I said, and the authorization codes for the full diplomatic archive. He did not ask which codes. We both knew which codes. The diplomatic archive on Veth Prime contains every agreement Earth has signed in 40 years of galactic membership. The authorization codes I was asking for are the administrative-level access codes that allow an ambassador to open, modify, and formally act on any document in that archive, including dissolution actions. They exist for emergency circumstances. There is no official definition of what constitutes an emergency. That is intentional. 12 hours, he said. Then I need to know what Earth is doing. You will know, I said. In 12 hours, everyone will know. He gave me the codes. He did not ask why. I have thought about that, about what it means, that he gave them without asking. Adisa is not a man who acts without information. He has access to more information than almost any human alive. He gave me the codes because the information he already had was sufficient, because he had watched the conclave session on a live feed in his office in Geneva, and he had seen 46 abstentions, and he had processed what the abstentions meant, not just diplomatically but structurally, what they revealed about how the conclave had decided to position itself, what they predicted about what would come next if the position went unchallenged. He gave me the codes because he had already made the same calculation I had made. He just needed someone in Veth Prime with the standing and the nerve to execute it. I sat down at my terminal. Outside my window, Veth Prime's twin suns were still low. the early morning red of them coming in at an angle that made the amber stone of the residence walls look orange, almost warm, almost like home if you did not look at the shadows, which fall at slightly wrong angles on Veth Prime because the planet's axial tilt is 8 degrees different from Earth's, and your body knows this even when your mind has adjusted. My body always knows. After 3 years, my body still registers, every morning, that the light is wrong. I opened the diplomatic archive. 214 documents. 40 years of relationship. Trade agreements signed when Earth's first diplomatic missions were still staffed primarily by people who had never left the solar system and were doing their best with a universal translator that misfired approximately 30% of the time on emotional nuance. Joint research charters, through which Earth scientists had contributed to the collective knowledge base of 46 species. Their work logged carefully, their names attached correctly, their contributions real and specific and traceable. Cultural exchange protocols that had brought human art and music and literature into galactic consciousness, and had brought alien forms of expression back to Earth, and had changed both in ways that could not be undone, and that I, personally, considered among the better things humanity had done. Defense cooperation accords, navigation agreements, communications infrastructure frameworks, medical research partnerships, agricultural data sharing protocols covering the methods Earth had developed for growing food, in conditions that made most galactic species look at the specifications and conclude that they must contain errors, because nothing should be able to grow in that. 214 documents. I opened a new file. I named it. I began to type. I want to be precise about what I was feeling as I typed, because I have heard the story told since, in news reports, in Adisa's formal statements, in the speech that Haruto gave to the Joint Defense Committee that was later published in full, and the version that has become the official narrative describes the moment as one of righteous anger, of historical reckoning, of an ambassador striking back against an institution that had failed her planet. That version is not wrong exactly, but it is not complete. I was angry. The anger was there. It had been there since Thav's neckplates went gold, and it had settled into the familiar warmth that I reach for the way you reach for a railing on a staircase in the dark. Not because it is comfortable, but because it keeps you upright. Anger does that for me, has since I was a girl in rooms that were not built for me, doing things that no one had designated space for me to do. The anger is the thing that steadies rather than burns. But under the anger, something quieter. Grief, maybe, or something adjacent to grief. The feeling of having believed in something sincerely, and then having the thing you believed in show you clearly what it actually was. I had believed in the conclave, not uncritically, not naively, but genuinely. I had believed that 40 years of careful, diligent, honest participation had accumulated into something that was real. I had believed that the relationships I had built in 3 years, the shared meals, the late negotiations, the moments of actual communication across the species gap, meant something durable. I had written the word enough 17 times without knowing I was writing it. That is what belief collapsing feels like, when it collapses quietly, like your own handwriting turning into something you do not fully recognize. I kept typing. At some point my hands began to shake. I noticed this the way you notice that a sound has been going on for a while before it registers in your conscious attention. The shaking had been happening, and I had simply not been attending to it. I looked at my hands. They were steady enough to continue, which was the only assessment that mattered. I let the anger do its steadying work. I let it settle into my chest and run down my arms to my fingers on the keys. The shaking stopped. Owen knocked at 4 in the morning. I told him to sleep. He knocked again at 5, and I told him the same thing. At 5:30 he slid a cup of tea under the door without knocking at all, because Owen Gareth is 26 years old and was raised in a tradition where tea is the appropriate response to anything that cannot be fixed by direct action, and he had correctly assessed that whatever was happening on the other side of his boss's door was not fixable by direct action on his part. I drank the tea. I kept typing. The document grew. Each treaty dissolution followed the same formal structure, identifying the agreement by name and registration number, citing the relevant withdrawal clauses, specifying the effective date, logging the authority under which the action was taken. For 214 documents, this is a significant amount of text. I did not use a template or an automated system, because automated systems do not catch the edge cases, the documents that have unusual withdrawal protocols, or conditional clauses, or attached sub-agreements that need to be explicitly included, or the withdrawal is legally incomplete. I read every clause, I verified every condition. I did it by hand because if I was going to do this, I was going to do it correctly. By the time the second sun cleared the Veth Prime horizon, the document was complete. I read it once from beginning to end. I was looking for doubt, not in the document. The document was correct. I knew it was correct. I had written it with the same precision I bring to every legal instrument I produce. I was looking for the feeling of doubt, which I know how to recognize because I have made large decisions before, and I know what it feels like when a decision still has room for revision. It sits differently from certainty, lower in the chest, wider, a spreading rather than a concentrated heat. I waited for it. It did not come. The decision had been made, I realized, before I sat down at the terminal. It had been made somewhere in the amber corridor after the session ended, in the place past anger that is not peace. I had only been executing it. I saved the document. I looked at it on the screen, the file name, the date stamp, the size of it. I reached for my coffee. It was cold. I drank it cold and I thought about what I was about to do, which was not a dissolution notice alone. The dissolution notice was the match. But the reason a match matters is what is ready to burn. And I had spent 3 years learning exactly how this structure was built, where it bore weight, where it depended on assumptions about Earth that were about to be revealed as wrong. There is a thing that happens when you have been a diplomat long enough. You stop seeing institutions as monuments and start seeing them as systems, a set of forces held in balance. And when you have spent enough time in rooms where the balance is maintained not by actual fairness, but by the collective agreement of everyone present to behave as though it is fair, you develop a specific eye for the load-bearing structures that nobody names, for the weight that is being quietly held up by the party that everyone else has decided does not need to be consulted about the arrangement. I had been holding weight for 3 years. Before me, Earth's diplomatic corps had been holding it for 40 years. And nobody in that chamber, not Thav with his gold neck plates and his 42 minutes of carefully sourced data, had thought to ask what would happen if we stopped. I was about to show them. But not alone. The dissolution notice was mine. The morning session was mine. What came between this desk and that chamber was not mine alone, and I want to be precise about that too, because the story that has become official flattens the 12 hours into a single action by a single person, and that is wrong in a way that matters. There is a basement lab in Geneva where a man named Yusuf al-Rashid had been awake for 22 hours when my terminal notification reached him. Yusuf is the chief xenobiologist for the Earth Council Science Bureau. He is 44 years old. He has degrees from 3 universities on 2 continents. He communicates primarily through data files and the occasional very long email that begins with no preamble and ends the same way. And he is the most patient human being I have ever met, where patient means not the absence of urgency, but the practice of placing urgency exactly where it belongs, and nowhere else. He had been running numbers for 3 years that nobody had asked for. The question behind the numbers was one he had formed himself. If you are going to rank species by what they have at a given moment, and if Earth consistently ranks low on those measures, what does Earth rank on if you change the measure? Not what a species has. What a species does when what it has is insufficient or absent entirely. Learning rate under hostile conditions. Physiological flexibility, when the environment changes faster than preparation allows. Problem-solving variance. Specifically, how widely the solutions generated by a species diverge from the species' known behavioral patterns when the known patterns stop working. The adaptation index. Earth scored first in 23 of the 27 submetrics. First. Yusuf had sent me the completed index 4 months earlier, in an encrypted file attached to an email that contained exactly 1 sentence. I think you will need this soon. No preamble. No explanation of the methodology, which ran to 400 pages, and is, I am told by people who understand it better than I do, impeccable. 1 sentence. I had printed the index and placed it in every briefing packet I carried to every session since, under the cover page, where I could reach it without appearing to reach for it. Now I pulled up the encrypted file. I forwarded it to my presentation system, staged for morning. I then opened a second file, which Yusuf had sent separately, and which I had been sitting on for 6 weeks, waiting for the right moment. He had sent it with no message at all, just the file, because Yusuf trusted that I would know when the moment arrived, and he did not want to influence my timing with his own impatience. The file contained a complete audit of Earth's infrastructure contributions to the Conclave's operational systems over 40 years. Not just the registered contributions, the official ones, the ones that appeared in the joint development records, all of them, including the ones that had been absorbed into the collective infrastructure and then, over time, removed from their attribution chains through the gradual process by which collaborative work becomes common property, without the original contributors being consulted about the reclassification. There were relay stations. There were navigational datasets. There were communications calibration protocols. There were 12 separate structural components of the Outer Belt communications grid that Earth had built and operated for 30 years, and that the current Conclave documentation listed simply as galactic infrastructure, with no originating party named. I had authorization-level access to all of it. I looked at the clock. 7 hours until the morning session. I looked at the window, where the Veth Prime dawn was now fully underway, orange going to gold, the alien sun doing the thing it does on clear mornings where the light comes in at the exact angle to make the room feel like something is beginning. Something was beginning. I closed the audit file. I placed a second notification to Haruto's office, not a call this time but a data packet, coordinates, timing, the specific text of the clause in the Conclave's own charter that defined what ships in international corridors were permitted to do under standard diplomatic protocols. The clause had been in the charter for 60 years. Nobody had ever considered it relevant to Earth because nobody had considered that Earth would one day have ships in position to use it. Haruto had considered it. I know this because he had sent me the clause reference 18 months ago, with no message attached, which is how Haruto communicates things he wants you to have without wanting to be on record as having communicated them. I sent the packet. I looked at the dissolution notice on my screen. 214 documents. I thought about Thav's neck plates going gold. I thought about 11 seconds spent on second place. I thought about the word enough 17 times, in my own handwriting. I closed my terminal. I made myself eat something from the resident's kitchen, bread, something that was technically cheese, in that it was made from biological processes that paralleled cheese, a piece of fruit that Owen had acquired somewhere and left on the counter with a note that said simply, nutrition. I ate the bread and the approximate cheese and the fruit, and I rinsed the cup, and I went to sleep for 4 hours, with the specific disciplined intentionality of someone who needs to be sharp in the morning and has trained herself to treat sleep as a tool rather than a reward. 4 hours later, I woke up before my alarm. I made coffee. Real coffee. From Earth. I put it in my thermos and I dressed in the black formal suit that I wear when I want to be read as serious rather than approachable, and I picked up my briefing packet with the adaptation index under the cover page and the dissolution notice loaded on my tablet in its final authorized form, and I walked out of the residence wing. The corridor was 240 meters of amber stone. I walked it for the 313th time. I did not count the lights. I arrived at the conclave chamber before anyone else and I sat down in the human seat, and I put my coffee on the table, and I waited for 46 species to file in, and for Thav to see me there early, which he would not expect, and to see the coffee, which was the most specifically and deliberately human thing I could have placed on that table, and to begin recalculating. Let him recalculating. He was going to need the practice. While I was sitting in that chamber with my hands flat on the table and my coffee cooling, and 46 species arriving to what they expected would be a standard morning session, 3 other people were doing 3 very different things in 3 very different places, and all of them were doing them because of a thread that connected back to a 12-hour window I had opened the night before. The first was Lieutenant Commander Priya Nair. Priya commands the Earthship Resolute, which is registered as a deep-range survey vessel, on extended patrol in the Outer Belt. This is accurate. It is also accurate that the Outer Belt is classified in Conclave strategic documents as low-value space, sparse, poorly resourced, not worth the attention of species with better options. The Orathi threat matrix does not include it in any assessment of Earth's military posture. because the threat matrix was designed by people who think about military presence in terms of what exists on the board, not in terms of what has been moving into position for 18 months, while everyone looked elsewhere. Priya received a Priority 1 signal from Haruto's office at 3:47 in the morning, Veth Prime local time. The signal was 4 words and a set of coordinates. She read it once. She has been on the Resolute for 8 months. 8 months of the outer belt, which is not glamorous work. It is slow. It is repetitive. It is the kind of assignment that self-important people at Central Command consider a posting for officers who are being managed out, and that people like Priya Nair consider an assignment that requires a specific kind of patience that most officers never develop because they are too busy being somewhere more visible. Priya is not self-important. She is 41 years old and has been commanding vessels since she was 33, and she has a reputation, among the people who matter, for being the person you send when you need something done correctly, in conditions that are not ideal. She read the signal once. She went to her bridge. She gave the heading. She did not explain it. She has 12 years of experience calibrating her voice for exactly the amount of information a crew needs to understand the weight of what they are doing, without crossing into the anxiety of what might go wrong, and she had calibrated it now to the setting she reserves for moments when history is doing something and the ship is part of it. Her crew read the new heading. They understood. The Resolute changed course. 13 other ships, in 13 other positions across the outer belt, received the same signal within the same 60-second window and made the same course change. 14 vessels, each one logged as survey or patrol or resupply in conclave traffic records, each one in a position that the threat matrix had assessed as non-threatening, each one now moving toward coordinates that were not in the outer belt, coordinates in the main corridors. The arteries. Nobody was told to block anything. The signal said nothing about blocking. It gave coordinates, and it gave a word. The word was present. Just present. Just there. And in Geneva, Yusuf al-Rashid saved the final version of a document he had been building for 3 years and sent it to a publication queue, set to release at 9 in the morning Veth prime time, which was exactly 30 minutes after my scheduled arrival at the morning session. 30 minutes. He had thought about the timing. He is always thinking about the timing. There is something I need to tell you about Yusuf al-Rashid before I tell you about the morning session. Something that the official accounts skip over because official accounts are made by people who want the story to have a single center, and Yusuf does not want to be a center. He is constitutionally opposed to being a center. He is the kind of scientist who publishes under collaborative authorship whenever possible, and lists himself alphabetically rather than by contribution, which means he is often third or fourth on a paper he wrote in its entirety. I met him 9 years ago at a joint Earth-Arathi Biological Research Summit in Oslo. He was presenting findings on interspecies enzyme compatibility, specifically on whether certain Arathi biological processes, when introduced into Earth soil-based agricultural systems, could increase yield without damaging the microbial ecosystem. He had spent 4 years on the research. His presentation was 40 minutes long, and in those 40 minutes he referenced his own name, approximately twice, both times in the context of noting where the methodology departed from his previous work. I sat next to him at dinner afterward. I asked him why his research was framed entirely as a contribution to Arathi science, when the agricultural application was overwhelmingly beneficial to Earth. He looked at me for a moment with the specific look of a person who has considered this, and arrived at an answer he finds slightly uncomfortable. Because they would not have funded it if it was framed as being for us, he said, and it needed to be done. That was when I understood what Yusuf al-Rashid was. Not a diplomat. He would be terrible at diplomacy in the formal sense. But a strategist of a particular and patient kind. The kind that works on timelines that do not match the administrative cycles of any organization. That plants things and waits. That understands that the research that changes everything is usually the research that nobody thought was urgent. He had been running the adaptation index for 3 years without funding, which means he had been running it in his own time, using data sets he already had access to for his official work, adding to it in the margins of a schedule that was already full. He had not told his department head. He had not applied for a grant. He had simply built it, quietly, with the methodical patience of a man who is not in a hurry, because he understands that the right moment for a piece of information is as important as the information itself. When I asked him, later, why he had sent it to me, rather than publishing it directly, he said, "Because you would know when." He was right. I want to tell you also about Lieutenant Commander Priya Nair's crew on the Resolute, specifically about her first officer, a man named Connor Elliott, who is 36 years old and from Melbourne, and who has the specific dry humor of people from Melbourne, combined with the specific patience of people who have chosen to spend their careers in the parts of space that do not make news. Connor had been on the Resolute for the full 8 months. When Priya gave the new heading that morning, he processed it, confirmed it with navigation, and then turned to look at the captain with exactly one question in his expression. She read the question. "Yes," she said, which answered it. He nodded. He turned back to his station. He called down to the engineering team and told them they were changing course and to prep the drive for sustained operation. He did not say where they were going. He did not say why. His voice carried exactly the weight of the moment, no more, no less. And when the drive came online and the Resolute began to move, Connor Elliott stood at his station and watched the heading numbers change and felt, he told me later, something that he described as the particular satisfaction of knowing exactly what you are doing and exactly why. "I'd been reading the reports," he said, "about the council session, about what Thav said. We all had. You don't think you're waiting for something, and then the signal comes and you realize you were." He paused. Then he said, "The heading was beautiful. You understand? Just the heading itself. The position of it. It was like watching someone play the right note." I understood. Now let me tell you about the session. The chamber was full by the time the morning session was called to order. I was already seated. I had been there for 20 minutes, long enough to watch the Valorian delegation arrive and find me in the human seat, with my hands flat on the table and my coffee in front of me, already there, already present, already finished with the part of the morning where she adjusts to the room. I watched Thav see me. His neck plates had been blue-green when he walked in, the satisfaction color, the color of a plan in progress. When he saw me, specifically when he saw the coffee, which smelled exactly like what it was, which was something from Earth that I had put on this table with intention, the plates shifted. Not much. A flicker. But I had been watching those plates for 3 years and I caught it. And what I saw was not calculation, not alarm, but the very brief flash of something underneath his composure that I had no established reference for, because I had never seen it on him before. I filed it. I looked away before he could notice I had noticed. The session was called. The morning agenda was light. A procedural update from the Orathi regarding the reclassification of 3 outer belt transit corridors. A resource allocation amendment from the Mreath Cooperative that had been tabled from the previous month. It's 2 items that on any other morning I would have engaged with carefully, noting the implications for Earth's positioning in the affected areas, drafting my remarks. Today I would not be remarking on those items. The Orathi update was completed. The Mreath amendment was moved to vote and passed with minor modifications. The chair moved to open business. Thav stood. Not to request the floor. He simply stood, and the room went quiet around his standing the way it had the day before, and his neck plates went gold, and I watched him choose his expression, composed, prepared, the generosity of a species that has already won, and can afford to be gracious about it. He was prepared to hear Earth's response. He had told me, in the architecture of his posture, that he expected the response to be measured, formal, appropriately moderate, the protest of a species that understands its position. He was going to let me speak. That was his performance of grace. He was going to give me the floor, which he had not given me the day before, and he was going to listen to whatever carefully worded expression of concern I offered, and he was going to nod, and the gold plates were going to stay gold, because this was already resolved, and the resolution was not in my favor, and he knew it, and soon I would demonstrate that I knew it too. He gestured to me. The floor was mine. I stood. I spoke in Valorian. Not through the translation matrix. In Valorian, which I had spent 6 months learning, because I was between 2 major negotiation cycles, and I had spare time, and because learning a language is the most specific form of attention you can pay to a species, and because I wanted to understand what Thav's statements sounded like when they were not being filtered through a translation algorithm that was optimized for factual content, and consistently under-translated the emotional subtext. It took Thav's neck plates approximately 3 seconds to respond. 3 seconds in which he heard his own language spoken by the one being in this room that he had assumed could not speak it, and in which his plates went completely still. I had never seen that before. 46 species go still. I began reading the withdrawal notice. I read it with the same pace and the same precision with which I had written it. Each document named, each registration number cited, each withdrawal clause invoked, each effective date specified. My Valorian is good enough that I could do this without consulting the translation matrix, and I did not consult it, because I wanted every word to be in a language that every being in this room could understand, without mechanical assistance. The first 5 documents into the reading, there was a sound in the chamber, not from any one species, a collective frequency, like a harmonic, produced by 46 distinct instruments, all reaching for the same register of disbelief. My translator rendered it as this: action cannot be real, which is an imperfect translation but the nearest available. I did not stop reading. By the 15th document, 2 species had attempted to signal the chair. The chair, to his credit, did not interrupt. What I was doing was procedurally permitted under conclave rules. There is no prohibition on a representative acting on their own government's legal documents during a session. There is simply no precedent for it, because it had never been done. By the 50th document, the chamber was entirely silent. By the 100th, I noticed that Thav's neck plates had gone a color I did not have a record for. Not gold, not blue-green, not the pale white of his satisfaction. A deep, still color that sat at the edge of what I understood about Valorian chromatic expression, and which I catalogued as requiring further study and set aside. 214. I put the tablet down. The chamber was very quiet. Then I picked up the data tablet I had brought separately, the one with Yusuf's index on it, and I placed it in the center of the table and I said, in Valorian, that for 3 years this council had been evaluating what Earth has. The document on the table was what Earth does with what it does not have. I slid the tablet forward. The Orathi cluster mind processed it in 4.3 seconds. I know because the Orathi emit a specific harmonic shift when they complete a processing cycle, a change in the base frequency of their collective presence that is subtle enough that most species do not notice it. I notice it because I spent 6 weeks at an Orathi research station 2 years ago and had nothing to do in the evenings but listen. The harmonic change at 4.3 seconds was the largest shift I had ever heard from them. Larger than when the new star charts were published. Larger than the Marith deposit disclosure. This was the sound of the Orathi encountering data that required them to revise a model they had considered settled. They do not perform surprise. They are physically incapable of it. So when the Orathi make that sound, you know the surprise is real. Every terminal in the chamber chimed simultaneously. I did not look at my terminal. I had made this decision deliberately, the night before, sitting in my residence with cold coffee, and the dissolution notice on my screen. I had decided that when the moment came I would be looking at Thav's face, not my own device, because 46 species worth of diplomatic data would be available to me later, and Thav's unmanaged expression at the moment of receiving the information would not. I looked at Thav. He looked at his terminal. He looked at me. He looked at his terminal again. His neck plates were cycling through colors faster than I had ever seen them move, through the familiar registers and past them, into frequencies I had no reference for, and I stored every one of them for the record I would write later, the personal record that supplements the official one, the one where I write what I actually saw. The terminals were showing the positions of 14 Earth vessels, in the arteries, not blocking, present. 14 ships where the Orathi threat matrix had assessed there were none, where the gap between what Earth had registered and what Earth had quietly positioned was now rendered visible in a single navigation update, distributed to every diplomatic terminal in the chamber simultaneously. Present. The chamber had the same collective quality it had when I began reading the withdrawal notice, that baseline, not quite silence of 46 species processing the same information at the same time and arriving at different conclusions about what it means. But underneath it now something else. Something I had felt in rooms before when the political topology changes and everyone in the room is feeling the change before anyone has described it. The floor was reorganizing itself. Thav stood. He was composed. I have to give him that. After everything, In the moment that his plan had failed in a way he had not prepared for, he stood up with the neck plates cycling, and the voice level and the manner still carrying the formal authority of a species that has been in this chamber for 300 years, and has no intention of performing otherwise. He asked, in Valorian, what humanity thought it was doing. I looked at him the way my mother looks at things that have disappointed her past the point of emotion, into something permanent and unchangeable. I had been keeping that look in reserve. I had learned it over 38 years of watching her apply it to situations and people and systems that had failed to account for her correctly, and she had applied it with such consistent precision that I know exactly what it costs and what it communicates, and I do not use it lightly. Leaving, I said in Valorian, and collecting what is ours before we go. I let him sit with that for 3 full seconds. 3 seconds is a long time in a chamber that quiet. Then I listed it. The navigational data that Earth's pilots had contributed to the collective charts over 40 years. Specific, documented, with the registration numbers of the original surveys attached. The data was logged under Earth's authorization codes, which meant it was removable at Earth's discretion, per the terms of the Joint Navigation Accord, which was one of the 214 documents I had just dissolved. The biological archives. 40 years of xenobiological research contributed to the collective knowledge base. Under the terms of the Joint Research Charter, also dissolved, the data was jointly held, but the dissolution provision was clear. In the event of withdrawal, each party's original contributions reverted to their source. Yusuf was going to be very busy for the next several weeks. The infrastructure. I named the 12 relay stations in the outer belt, each one by designation number and current operational status. Each one built by Earth, funded by Earth, staffed by Earth, and absorbed over time into the general inventory of Conclave communications infrastructure. Each one still registered, in the original construction documents, as Earth property, under Earth operation. I was not dissolving the stations. I was notifying the Council that Earth would be withdrawing operational cooperation, effective immediately, pending renegotiation, under terms that reflected the actual distribution of contribution and benefit. I watched every species in the room calculate what the outer belt relay stations meant for their communications infrastructure. I watched the calculation happen in real time on faces and plates and bioluminescent patterns and every other medium through which feeling moves in beings that are not human. The outer belt relay stations handle 31% of long-range galactic communication traffic. This is not a number that appears in any document I had been given when I was briefed for this posting. It is a number that I calculated myself, over 18 months, from traffic data that was technically public record and practically unread, because nobody thought the outer belt was interesting enough to read traffic data from. Owen had helped me with the calculation. He had asked, at the time, what it was for. I had told him it was background research. He had nodded. He had not asked again, because Owen Gareth understands instinctively that some background research is background research, and some is something else entirely, and the difference is not something you ask about. Thav began to speak. He is composed, as I said. He is also experienced, which is a different thing, and experience is what he reached for now. He spoke with the measured, patient authority of a species that has been managing interstellar relations for 3 centuries, and he laid out, with care, and without overt emotion, the consequences of what Earth had done, the economic isolation that would follow withdrawal from 40 years of cooperative frameworks, the military exposure of a species that had just burned its defensive alliances, along with its trade agreements, the vulnerability of a population that was, as measured by every relevant metric, not equipped to operate outside the support structure of galactic community. He said the phrase considerable limitations again. He said it as a description. He said it as an accurate account of what the data showed. He meant it, I think, as something closer to concern than contempt, which made it worse, because concern is what you offer to a thing that cannot help what it is. Contempt at least sees you as an agent. I waited for him to finish. I took one full, even breath. We know, I said. We have made peace with things larger than ourselves before. That is, as you have noted for the official record, something we are experienced at. I looked at him. I let him see what was in my face, which was not anger, and was not grief, and was not the particular expression you wear when you are performing strength. It was something older than any of those. The expression of someone who has simply finished with a version of a situation and is ready for whatever version comes next. I picked up my coffee. Still warm. I walked out. I did not look at the chamber as I left. I looked at the door, the amber stone wall around it, the particular way the light came in from the high windows and hit the grain of the stone at an angle that revealed the streaks in it, the history of the rock, the layers of time compressed into something that had been shaped into a wall and called authority. The door was in front of me and then behind me. The corridor was 240 meters of the same stone, and I walked it in the specific silence that follows a large action, the silence that feels loud because you have just been very loud, and the contrast makes the air around you seem to compress. Owen was 20 feet ahead, waiting. He had positioned himself at the precise distance from the chamber door that said, "I am here," without saying I was listening, which is not a distance you find by accident. He had chosen it consciously. I looked at his face as I approached. He was 26 years old and had been in Veth Prime for 6 months and had slid tea under my door at 5:30 in the morning and had run the outer belt traffic calculation with me without asking what it was for. He was looking at me with the expression of someone who is realizing, in this exact moment, what kind of day this will turn out to have been. "Walk with me," I said. We walked. The corridor was 240 meters, and I walked it for the 314th time, and behind me in the chamber I had just left, 46 species were sitting with the documents, and the data, and the terminal notification, and the specific ambient frequency of a political landscape that had just been reconfigured by something none of them had included in their models. I did not count the lights. I was already thinking about what came next. What comes next is the part that the official narrative calls Earth's return to the table, which is technically accurate, and misses the point in the way that technical accuracy often misses points. What happened was not a return. A return implies you go back to where you were. What happened was a reconstruction, from different materials, with a different foundation, in which the question of who was doing the building and for whose benefit was no longer something anyone in that chamber had the luxury of treating as settled. But that was 6 months away. In the corridor, with Owen Gareth keeping pace beside me, all I knew was that my coffee was still warm, and that the amber stone corridor looked exactly the same as it had 313 times before, and that somewhere above Veth Prime's orbital plane, 14 Earthships were holding position in the arteries, and in a basement in Geneva, Yusuf al-Rashid was about to push a button. I thought about Thav's neck plates going completely still. I thought about that stillness, and what it means in a being that is always expressing, when the expression simply stops, when the body ceases, for a moment, to perform what the mind has not yet caught up to. He had known, in that moment, before I had finished the first sentence, what kind of morning this was going to be. I had known it the night before, standing in a corridor that still smelled like the session, with the word "enough" written 17 times in my own handwriting, and a decision already formed, and waiting for the machinery to begin. Some things are known before they are said. Some things are settled before the argument starts. I have thought about this, since then, about where the actual turning point was. Not the dissolution notice, which was the action, not the relay stations or Yusuf's index or Haruto's ships, which were the tools. The turning point, I think, was the moment in the chamber the day before when I stopped counting overhead panels and wrote the same word 17 times without intending to. That is when something finished. Everything after was just the finishing. In the 6 hours after I walked out of the chamber, the following things happened, in the following order. The conclave chair called a recess. This is standard procedure when a session experiences a procedural event that requires administrative processing, which is the formal category under which my withdrawal notice had been logged, and which is a category that has no precedent for something at this scale, which meant the chair was buying time, while his office determined what the procedural response was supposed to be. I know this because Owen had a source in the administrative division, a Mreath administrative officer, named something unpronounceably beautiful in her own language, and who Owen called Nella, for conversational convenience. And Nella was the kind of person who found administrative chaos personally offensive, and therefore tracked it closely. She informed Owen, via encrypted message, that the chair's office had contacted the legal division, the historical records department, and 2 external consultants within 20 minutes of my departure, and that all 4 had confirmed the same thing. The withdrawal was legal, fully documented, and binding. The Orathi cluster mind requested a private consultation with Earth's diplomatic mission within 40 minutes of the session recess. Owen took the initial contact and told them, politely, that Ambassador Ose Mensah was in meetings and would be in touch regarding scheduling. There were no meetings. I was drinking tea and reading the traffic data from the relay stations, which was showing the first signs of what the communications analysis team had predicted would happen once awareness of the operational withdrawal spread through galactic network monitoring systems. Traffic was rerouting. The outer belt relays were still running. I had not shut them down. I had withdrawn cooperative operation, which is a meaningful legal distinction, but the species whose communication systems were most dependent on the outer belt routes were not waiting for the legal clarification. They were rerouting, proactively, which meant they had done the same calculation I had done, and they were acting on it before anyone told them to. Nella also reported that the Valorian diplomatic staff had held an internal session lasting 53 minutes, during which Thav's neck plates had been, by one account, a color that even the Valorian staff members found unusual. This detail was second-hand, and I could not verify it, and I included it in my personal record anyway, because it was the kind of detail that illuminates something the official record will not preserve. At 11:45 in the morning, exactly 2 hours and 17 minutes after I left the chamber, the adaptation index published. Yusuf had set the timing. 30 minutes after the session start had been the plan, which would have been approximately 30 minutes into my reading of the withdrawal notice. The recess had shifted things. He had a release delay built in that he could extend, and he had extended it, holding until the session was formally recessed, and the news of what had happened in the chamber was beginning to move through galactic information networks, so that the index arrived not into a quiet space, but into a space that was already full of questions, that was already processing the morning's events, that needed something to attach to. He told me later that he had refreshed his news feed 17 times in the 30 minutes between session recess and publication, and that each time he refreshed it he found the story had spread further, and the questions being asked were increasingly the exact questions his index was designed to answer. He pushed the button at exactly the right moment. Within 4 hours, it was the most accessed document in the Conclave's public archive. Within 8 hours, it had been downloaded by the official research departments of 31 member species. Within 24 hours, the Orathi had published a preliminary response that was 14 pages long and that Yusuf characterized, in an email to me with the subject line, "Well," as the most thorough acknowledgement of their own analytical error that the Orathi have ever produced in writing. Yusuf was pleased about this in the specific way that scientists are pleased when their data is taken seriously by people who previously would not have taken it seriously. He expressed this pleasure in the same way he expresses most things, by sending me another email, this one with no subject line, containing only the sentence, "Second reading was even better than the first. They understood the agricultural submetric on the reread." I read this and felt something warm in my chest that was neither anger nor grief, but something I do not have a precise word for, which is the feeling of watching someone you respect be correctly understood by people who should have understood them earlier. Now, the ships. I have been careful, in this account, not to use language that implies what the 14 vessels were doing constituted a threat. I want to be precise about this, because precision matters here, and imprecision has already cost humanity significantly. The ships were in public corridors, international space. They were not stationed outside any species' territory. They were not blocking any routes. They were not armed in any way that differed from their standard deep patrol configuration, which is legal under Conclave Charter Article 44, subsection 3, and which was the article reference I had sent to Haruto's office the night before, along with the coordinates. They were present. The distinction matters. A threat says, "I will do something to you." Presence says, "I am here, and I have been here, and you did not know that, and now you do." The discovery that something exists where you believed there was nothing, that is a different kind of moment than confronting something that is actively advancing. Advancement you respond to. Discovery you sit with. You sit with what it means that you did not know. You sit with what else you might not know. You sit with the specific discomfort of having made assessments that were not wrong because of missing data. You had access to data, but wrong because of which questions you thought to ask. The Conclave's Security Council, which is a body that meets in closed session and whose deliberations are not publicly released, requested all available data on outer belt vessel positioning and received it within 6 hours of the morning session. I know what was in that data, because the data was Earth's own navigation logs, which we provided in full, because we had no reason not to, and several reasons to. Specifically, because the logs confirmed everything that the coordination notification had shown. 14 ships, 8 months in position, full compliance with all relevant conclave traffic protocols during the entire period, no violations, no infractions, not even a disputed routing choice. Just present, in exactly the right places. The Valorian hegemony contacted the human diplomatic mission at 4 in the afternoon, not Thav directly, his staff, a representative whose name I recognized as the person who handles matters that Thav wants addressed without his direct involvement. She was courteous. She asked whether Ambassador Osei Mensah would be available for a preliminary discussion regarding the framework for bilateral renegotiation. I told Owen to put her off for 2 days. He looked at me with one eyebrow slightly elevated, which is his version of asking a question without asking a question. 2 days, I said. He nodded. He drafted the response. He sent it. 2 days was not punitive. 2 days was accurate. I had a great deal to do in 2 days, including a full legal review of all 214 dissolution actions, a complete inventory audit of the infrastructure items I had cited in the chamber, a preliminary coordination call with Adisa's office about Earth's public communications on the matter, and a very long conversation with Yusuf about the practical implications of reclaiming the biological archive data, which was distributed across approximately 90 different conclave research databases and needed to be extracted according to a process that Yusuf had already designed, which he sent me in an email that morning, under the subject line, Extraction Protocol, version 3, final, and which was 67 pages long and flawlessly organized. Yusuf does not waste words, and he does not waste organization. The protocol was exactly as long as it needed to be, and no longer. I worked through the afternoon and into the evening, and at 7 o'clock Owen knocked on the residence office door and opened it without waiting for a response, and said that Nella had sent word that Councillor Thav had submitted a formal request for a closed session address to the full conclave on the subject of Earth's withdrawal actions, and that the request had been granted for the following morning. All right, I said. You're not going, Owen said. He said this not as a question. Earth's seat will be empty, I said, which is its own statement. He thought about this for a moment. That's fairly significant, he said. It is what it is, I said. I went back to the legal review. He brought me dinner. I ate it at my desk. It was good. Thav's closed session lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes, according to Nella's sources. I do not know what he said. The session records are sealed, and will remain sealed until the conclave's standard declassification timeline releases them, which is 50 years from now, long after everyone currently in this story has stopped being relevant. What I know is the effect, because the effect was visible in who made contact and when. The Orathi, as I said, contacted us on the 11th day. The Mreath came sooner, day 7. They sent a gift basket first, then a formal communication. The gift basket contained Mreath preserved fruit and a handwritten note, in the Mreath's primary script with a translation attached, that said in approximate terms that they had always enjoyed the relationship with Earth's diplomatic mission, and hoped that the current situation would be resolved in a way that preserved what was valuable. I found this genuinely touching. The Mreath are good people, for a given value of people. They make beautiful textiles and their fruit is exceptional, and they had abstained because the collective pressure of the chamber in that moment had been significant, and they are not a species built for going against collective direction. I held no grievance with the Mreath. I told Owen to acknowledge the gift basket warmly, and to put the fruit in the common room where the staff could have some. The fruit disappeared in approximately 4 hours. Yusuf was right about the sweetness. Day 9, the Keth Dominion contacted us. The Keth are an interesting case because they had been among the most vocally skeptical of Earth's conclave membership during the admission debates 40 years ago, on grounds that I had read in the historical record, and that were, even accounting for the era, not great. They came on day 9 with a formal apology document that was 11 pages long and that Adisa's legal team assessed as the most comprehensive diplomatic apology the Keth had ever produced for any action toward any party. I read it. I noted that it was thorough and precisely worded, and that it addressed the specific actions of the session rather than the general history, which was either admirably focused or conveniently narrow, depending on how charitable you wanted to be. I chose to be charitable, because charity is a tool the same way anger is a tool, and the moment determines which one serves better. I accepted the apology. I forwarded it to the Historical Record Archive. I did not, immediately, reopen treaty discussions with the Keth. That would take until the 3rd month, and the terms of the renewed framework were different from the dissolved one in ways that I will not detail here, but that Adisa's office described as significantly more reflective of Earth's actual contribution profile. I accepted this description as accurate without comment, because commenting on it would have sounded like crowing, and crowing is what you do when you have won something, and what I had done was not win something. What I had done was correct something. Those are not the same. By the end of the 1st month, 39 of the 46 species had initiated some form of contact with Earth's diplomatic mission. 7 had not. 5 of those 7 were simply slow. Their governments move slowly, their decision-making processes are distributed and deliberate, and they would arrive by the end of the 2nd month with careful and considered communications that reflected the time they had taken. 2 of those 7 were the ones I mentioned earlier, the ones who, in the informal conversations of the contact period, said things that told me more about what the session had really been about than Thav's 42 minutes of prepared data had. I will not name them here, they know who they are, and more relevantly, we know who they are, and the 2 treaties that were not renewed are, I think, among the better outcomes of the entire situation. Some clarity is worth the cost of the clarity. The relay stations went back into cooperative operation on day 62. The renegotiation of the operational terms took 3 weeks, and produced an agreement that is significantly different from the original framework. Earth is listed as primary operator. The contribution and benefit structure has been revised. The attribution language in the joint documentation now reflects what actually happened, and who actually built what. These changes are administrative. They are also everything. On day 45, Yusuf published a 2nd document. This one was shorter, 12 pages, and it was a preliminary analysis of what Earth's scientific contributions would mean, in practice, for conclave collective knowledge development over the next 20 years, if the withdrawal of the biological archive data was made permanent. He had modeled 3 scenarios. The most optimistic scenario, which assumed complete independence and full continuation of Earth's research programs, still showed a significant reduction in the pace of several key research areas. The least optimistic scenario, which he described without editorializing in a way that I found characteristically precise, produced a chart that I was told caused the Orathi's equivalent of a long, quiet intake of breath when they saw it. The Orathi do not have lungs. Whatever the equivalent is, it occurred. Yusuf sent me the 2nd paper with a note that said, "For reference, not for pressure. You'll know the difference." I did know the difference. I used it as reference. The biological archive data was returned to cooperative access as part of the overall renegotiation framework, under terms that reflected its actual origin and value. Priya Nair brought the Resolute home in the 5th month. She docked at Earth Station Meridian, which is the largest orbital platform humanity operates, and she gave an interview to one journalist. One, a science and exploration correspondent named Claire Owens, who had covered the Outer Belt Survey program since its inception, and who was, therefore, one of approximately 40 people on Earth who had been following it closely enough to understand what the presence of those ships in those corridors actually represented. The interview was 20 minutes long. Claire asked how long the Resolute had been in position at those coordinates. Priya said 8 months. Claire asked whether Earth Command had planned this as a response to the council session. Priya said the positioning had been ongoing for 8 months, which preceded the session. Claire asked what the ships were doing now. Priya said they had returned to assigned patrol areas. Claire asked if they would return to those corridor coordinates if circumstances required. Priya was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then she said that Earth vessels operate on assigned patrol schedules, and she didn't discuss operational details publicly. Which was not a no. The interview was published under the headline, "Commander says Earth vessels were always there." The headline was accurate. It was also the most precise compression of what the morning session had meant that any journalist produced in the months that followed. They were always there. Nobody thought to look. That is the thing that I want the record to hold, not as triumphalism and not as bitterness, but as fact. The assessment of what Earth is had been made on the basis of what was visible. What was visible was what Earth chose to show. What Earth chose to show was calibrated to the level of attention the Council had chosen to pay, which is to say, partial attention, intermittent, filtered through the assumption that a species ranked 39th in economic output and 44th in military projection was not worth the full bandwidth. We were always there. In the outer belt, in the relay stations, in the research protocols and the navigational data and the agricultural contributions and the biological archives and the 6 months of Yusuf's evenings and Priya's patience and Haruto's 11 seconds of silence and the word enough written 17 times in the margin of a briefing document in a chamber where nobody was looking at the human seat. Always there. 40 years of being there. The evening of the day Priya's interview published, Owen came to my office with his jacket still on, which means he had come directly from somewhere without stopping to put things down, and he stood in my doorway and said that the Valorian diplomatic mission had formally requested that the adaptation index be incorporated into the standard evaluation framework for new species admission applications. He was trying very hard not to smile. "That's appropriate," I said. He lost the battle with the smile. "Yes," he said, "it really is." He went home. I stayed at my desk for another hour, going through the renegotiation documents for the following day's session. Outside my window, the Veth Prime night was doing what it does, the twin moons making a light that is not like Earth moonlight, but that I had grown accustomed to in 3 years, and that I found, if I am honest, beautiful in its own way, pale and double-sourced, casting 2 faint shadows from everything. Everything casts 2 shadows here. I have thought about that, on and off, since the morning session, about the dual nature of everything on Veth Prime, the double suns, the double moons, the double shadows, the way the amber stone changes color depending on which sun is up, the way the light is never simple, never from one source. I had come here 3 years ago to represent a single thing, Earth's interests in the broadest possible definition. I had sat in a chair that was not made for me, and drunk coffee that was not what was offered, and learned languages that nobody said I needed to know, and counted things that nobody told me to count. And I had done it, because that is what I do. That is what my training and my nature and my history equipped me to do, in rooms that were not built with me in mind. I had written the word enough 17 times. And then I had done what the word asked for. The renegotiation documents were long and detailed and important, and I worked through them with the same precision I bring to everything, and at 10 o'clock I put them down, and I went to sleep, and I did not dream about the chamber, or the gold neck plates, or the 46 abstentions. I dreamed about the amber stone corridor, 240 meters. I walked every step of it, and I did not count anything, and when I reached the end, there was a door, and I went through it, and on the other side was not the chamber, but the outside, open air, the Veth Prime night with its double moons and its pale divided light, and I stood in it for a moment, and breathed air that still smelled like copper shavings and burnt sugar, and was still wrong for human lungs in the way that I had adjusted to but never fully accepted. I breathed it. I was still there. I am writing this on my mother's porch in Accra, on a Thursday afternoon, in the kind of light that architects do not design for because it cannot be designed. It is just the sun, doing what it has done over this city since before there was a city here to do it over, coming in low and rich and specific to this latitude, this humidity, this time of year, and making everything it touches look like something worth keeping. My mother has gone inside. She brought me food 20 minutes ago, a plate of things she had been cooking since this morning, for reasons she did not explain, and that I did not ask about. Because one of the things you learn about your mother, when you work far from home for long periods of time, is that the cooking is not about the food, and asking about it would miss the point. I ate everything on the plate. I left it clean. She saw me leave it clean and said nothing, and went inside. And that silence was a full conversation that I understood completely. I have been home for 3 weeks. After 6 months on Veth Prime managing the renegotiation, the calls, the sessions, the procedural reviews, the slow and sometimes difficult work of reconstructing 40 years of relationship on different terms. Adisa told me to go home for a month. He said this in the tone he uses when he has decided something and is informing me of it rather than suggesting it. He is my superior, and I have disagreed with him publicly twice in 11 years, and both times I was correct. But this time, I thought he was probably correct too, and I went home. I have been sitting on this porch a great deal. There is the leaning tree on the corner that has been leaning in the same direction for as long as I can remember, which my mother says is toward the afternoon sun, and which my aunt insists is because the roots are being pulled by the drainage system installed in 2019. I find both explanations plausible, and have no strong preference for either. The tree leans. It has always leaned. Probably it will continue to lean. There is the wall of the house across the street, which my mother finds architecturally regrettable, and which she has communicated to the owner 3 separate times over 20 years, and which remains unchanged, and which she considers an ongoing project rather than a failed one, because my mother does not recognize the category of failed ongoing project. I have been thinking, on this porch, about what the last 7 months actually were. Not the official version, which exists in the record and is accurate as far as it goes. Not the journalistic version, which varies from account to account, but tends toward narratives of Earth striking back, or humanity's quiet strength revealed, which are not wrong, but are more dramatic than what it felt like from the inside. I have been thinking about what it actually was, sitting here with the afternoon light on the leaning tree, and my mother's voice occasionally from inside the house, and the specific weight of a month that has no sessions in it. What it was, I think, is a correction. Not a victory, though I understand why people use that word, and I understand why it is satisfying, and I do not begrudge anyone the satisfaction. But victory implies a competition, implies a score, implies a moment when one side has more and one side has less. What happened was not that. What happened was that a system that had been operating on a miscalibrated model was forced to update the model. That is not winning. That is just what happens when a model is wrong, and the wrongness becomes undeniable. The model was wrong about what Earth is, not about what Earth had. Those numbers were accurate enough. 39th in economic output, 42nd in technological development rate, 44th in military projection per the Orathi threat matrix. Those numbers were real. Thav's data was real. I have never disputed the numbers, and I do not dispute them now. The model was wrong about what the numbers meant. It assumed that a species is what its measurements say it is at the moment of measurement, and that the measurement is sufficient to predict everything else. It assumed that a species ranked 44th in military projection has 44th place military relevance. It assumed that a species contributing to collective research programs at a level that ranks low in the output metrics is contributing at the level of its ranking, when in reality, Earth had been contributing above its ranking in multiple categories for decades, and the contribution had been absorbed into collective infrastructure and attributed to the collective rather than to Earth, because nobody had considered it important to track origin in a species they had already assessed as low value. The model was wrong because it did not account for patience. Not patience as a virtue, patience as a method. The specific, practiced, generational patience of a species that has spent its entire existence on a planet that consistently produced conditions designed to end it, that has survived by adapting faster than the conditions changed, that learned early and deeply that the distance between now and next is where everything important happens if you are willing to stay in that distance and work. Yusuf al-Rashid, working evenings for 3 years on data nobody asked for. Priya Nair, in the outer belt for 8 months, doing the slow work of positioning correctly. Haruto Mase, spending 11 seconds in silence before saying a single word. The 40 years before I arrived. All of it patience. All of it the specific, methodical kind that is not waiting for something to happen, but making something happen slowly enough that it looks like nothing until it is too large to be nothing anymore. The Orathi called me, in the 4th month of renegotiation, to discuss what they described as a philosophical question. This is unusual for the Orathi, who do not typically separate philosophy from practical application. They would say the distinction is not real, but the phrasing told me they wanted a different kind of conversation than the renegotiation sessions had been, and I gave them the conversation they were asking for. They wanted to understand, they said, Why Earth had not used the adaptation index earlier. Why, in 3 years of sessions where Earth's standing in the Council was regularly implicated or undermined, had I not produced this data sooner? I thought about how to answer this accurately. I thought about Yusuf's email with no subject line, and the sentence, "I think you will need this soon." I thought about the morning I received it, and put the index in my briefing packet under the cover page, and did not tell anyone. The data needed a moment, I said. The Orathi were quiet for long enough that I wondered whether the connection had dropped. "Explain the moment," they said. "The index is accurate in isolation," I said. "It has been accurate since Yusuf completed it. But accuracy in isolation is not the same as accuracy in context. If I had presented the adaptation index in a routine session, when the Council's general position was maintenance rather than examination, it would have been filed and assessed and possibly discussed in a subcommittee, and eventually placed into the background of some future report. Because the moment I presented it was the morning after the Council had formally, on the record, assessed Earth as negligible, the index did not land in a space of general evaluation. It landed in a space where every species in the chamber was actively reconsidering the model. The same data has a different effect depending on what the room is ready to receive. Another long pause. "You chose the moment," they said. "Yusuf chose the moment," I said. I held it until he said it was time. There was a further pause, and then the Orathi said something that my translator rendered as approximately, "This is a form of intelligence that we had not included in our frameworks." I found this statement remarkable for 2 reasons. First, because the Orathi acknowledging the absence of something from their frameworks is, as I have established, the equivalent of a significant event. Second, because of what it implied, that their frameworks had been designed to measure what was present, what was active, what was expressed, and had not been designed to account for what was being withheld, what was being timed, what was being saved, for a moment that had not yet arrived. They had no framework for a species that was patient in this way. They had no category for the intelligence of knowing when not to act. I told Yusuf about this conversation in my next email to him. His response, which arrived 6 hours later because Yusuf sleeps at reasonable hours, when he is not in the middle of something, was 2 sentences. "I'm glad they noticed. Though I'd have preferred they noticed earlier, under different circumstances." This is the most emotional statement I have ever received from Yusuf al-Rashid. I framed it in my mind and have kept it there since. There is a woman on this street, 3 houses down from my mother's, who has lived there my entire life. Her name is Mrs. Abina Darko, and she is 79 years old, and she was here when I came home from my first posting abroad, which was in Brussels, and was not glamorous, and she was here when I came home from Orathi space, which was glamorous but deeply uncomfortable, and she is here now. And every time I have come home she has asked me the same question. She asked it 3 days after I arrived home from Veth Prime, when she saw me on the porch in the afternoon. She crossed the street, and stood at my mother's gate, and looked at me with the careful, complete attention of someone who has been watching a person for decades, and knows that the person in front of her now is not quite the same person who left. "How was it?" she said. This is always her question, not "Where did you go?" or "What happened?" or "What does it mean?" How was it? The question of whether the experience was as it should have been, whether the thing you went to do was worth doing, whether you came back whole enough to sit on a porch on a Thursday afternoon. "Difficult," I said. "Then better." She nodded. "That's how it usually goes," she said. She went back across the street. I have been thinking about her phrasing ever since. Not the content of it. The content is simple, accurate, not surprising. I have been thinking about the tone. She said it the way you say something that you know to be true, because you have watched it be true many times, in many different forms, across many years of paying attention to the world, not with bitterness about the difficulty, and not with relief about the better. Just recognition. This is the pattern. This is how it goes. She was not surprised. I asked my mother, later that evening, whether Mrs. Darko had watched the council session broadcast. My mother thought about it. She watched some, she said. She didn't watch all of it. She said she didn't need to. I found this interesting. What did she say about it afterward? I said. My mother was quiet for a moment. She said she hoped you had eaten, my mother said. I laughed. I laughed harder than I have laughed in 7 months, and my mother watched me laugh with the expression she wears when she finds something funnier than she is willing to admit. "That's all?" I said. "She said they would figure it out," my mother said. She meant the council. She said they would need some time, but they would figure it out. I thought about this. "She was right," I said. "She usually is," my mother said. On the second week home, Adisa called. Not a formal call, a personal one, on his civilian line, which he uses for conversations he wants to have, without the institutional presence of his office on the line. He asked how I was. I told him I was well, which was mostly accurate. He asked what I was doing. I said sitting on my mother's porch. He said that sounded correct. Then he was quiet for a moment, which with Adisa usually means he is deciding how to phrase something. "The council has submitted a formal request," he said, "through diplomatic channels." "What kind of request?" I said. "They want you to come back as Earth's permanent representative," he said, "with enhanced standing. They're proposing a revised protocol that would give the human seat full speaking rights at the opening of any session." I looked at the leaning tree. "What does that mean practically?" I said. "It means no one can open a session on a matter touching Earth's interests without Earth having the floor first," he said. "Not in a recess. Not after 42 minutes of prepared remarks. First." I sat with this. "They drafted it quickly," I said. 61 days, he said, "which is very quickly for the conclave." I thought about 61 days. About what 61 days of working quickly looks like in a body that has moved at its own pace for 300 years. About what it means when 3 centuries of institutional momentum changes direction. "Send me the protocol document," I said. "Already sent," he said. "There's a note attached." "From the chair?" I said. "From Thav," he said. I was quiet. "I'll read it," I said. "I have not yet told you what Thav's note said, and I have been deciding whether to include it here. It is in the record. Adisa's office received it through official channels and logged it officially, and it exists in the permanent diplomatic archive. It is not a secret. It is, I think, a real thing, in the sense that what it says reflects something genuine about a being who had spent 300 years in a position of authority and encountered, for possibly the first time in that span, a moment in which the position's authority was insufficient to produce the outcome the position expected. He did not apologize. I would not have believed an apology from Thav, not because he is dishonest, but because apology is not the form in which Valorian experience moves. What he wrote was a formal acknowledgement. He acknowledged that the Council's assessment of Earth's developmental profile had been incomplete. He acknowledged that the withdrawal actions undertaken by Earth's diplomatic mission were legally correct and procedurally sound. He acknowledged that the adaptation index represented a body of data that should have been solicited and incorporated into galactic knowledge frameworks earlier. And then, in the final line of the note, which is not in the formal diplomatic language that the rest of it uses, but in something that sounds more like how Valorians speak when they are not performing for an audience, he wrote, "We did not know what we were measuring when we measured you." I read it 3 times. I filed it in the personal record alongside the 17 repetitions of the word enough. I have thought about his phrasing, "We did not know what we were measuring," and I think it is the most honest thing Thav has ever said in any of my interactions with him, and I think it took him 61 days to say it, because honesty at that level requires processing time, when the honest thing being said requires you to revise your understanding of something you have understood, as settled for a very long time. We did not know what we were measuring. No, they did not. But the measurement was always there to be taken. We were always there to be understood. The afternoon light on my mother's porch is changing the way it changes here, going from gold to orange as the sun moves lower, the long shadows stretching the shape of the leaning tree across the road, in a way that makes the lean look more dramatic than it does at noon. My plate is empty. My tea is finished. Inside the house, my mother is doing something that involves the specific sounds of a kitchen at the end of the day, the low, familiar sounds of a place that has been a place for a long time, and is comfortable being what it is. I am going back to Veth Prime in 11 days. I have read the revised protocol document 3 times, and discussed it with Adisa and with Owen, who is already back at the mission, and who has been managing the renegotiation calendar in my absence, with a competence that I find both reassuring and slightly mortifying, given that he has been there for 8 months. He is going to be an exceptional diplomat. I have already told Adisa as much. Adisa said he knows, and that he is already thinking about Owen's next posting, which is the specific response that tells me Owen has made the right kind of impression in the right places, and I need not worry about his trajectory. I am not going back because the council asked me to come back. I am going back because there is work to do. There is always work to do. That is not a complaint. It is the specific nature of the thing, not a destination but a practice, not a state to arrive at, but a process of continuous showing up in rooms and doing the thing that the rooms require, and doing it more precisely, and more specifically, and more patiently than whatever the room was designed for, until the room either changes to account for you or becomes irrelevant. 40 years of showing up. 40 years of work that registered in rankings as 39th and 42nd and 44th and 2nd. Always second in the category they spent the least time on. Second in adaptability. First in what we do when the thing we have is insufficient for what we need to become. Mrs. Darko came back to the gate this afternoon, just before the light changed. She stopped and looked at me the way she has looked at me every time I have been home, with the complete, careful attention of someone who is checking to see whether the person in front of her is the same as the person who left. "Better," she said. "Better," I said. She nodded, satisfied, and went home for her evening. The tree on the corner is still leaning. The wall across the street is still architecturally regrettable. The sky above Accra is going the particular deep blue that it goes here at this hour, not dark yet but past gold, the transition color, the color that is between what the day was and what the night will be. Up through that blue, past the clouds and the atmosphere and the long, dark distance that is enormous and ordinary simultaneously, there are 46 council chambers, where 46 species are working through the implications of 61 days of very rapid revision. There are relay stations running on renegotiated terms. There are researchers across multiple species working through the adaptation index and its implications for how they have been categorizing and assessing life in this galaxy. There is a corridor in the outer belt where 14 Earth vessels were present for 8 months before anyone knew to look for them. There are 2 treaties that are ash and will remain ash, and the ash is not a failure. There is Yusuf in his basement, already running numbers on the next question that nobody has thought to ask yet. There is Priya on the Resolute, back on patrol, in new assigned sectors that the updated deployment framework designates as medium priority, which is an upgrade from the documentation's previous assessment of her vessel's area as low value, and which Priya told Claire Owens in a brief follow-up interview she found appropriate, and a reasonable correction of an earlier miscalculation. There is Haruto, who has said nothing publicly, and will say nothing publicly, because Haruto communicates in actions, and in the single word good, in a specific tone, and in 11 seconds of deliberate silence, and those are the communications that matter. There is Owen Gareth, 26 years old, in the human diplomatic residence on Veth Prime, going through a renegotiation calendar with the focus of someone who has recently understood what this work actually is, and wants to do it correctly. There is my mother inside the house, cooking in the late afternoon, making food I did not ask for, expressing in the oldest and most accurate language she knows, that I am home, and she is glad, and the world continues, and the plate will be full when I need it. There is Mrs. Darko, 3 houses down, who watched some of the council session and didn't need to watch all of it, and said they would figure it out, and who was right, and who asked me better, and heard the answer, and went home satisfied. And there is the sky. The same sky. Always the same sky that my grandmother looked at and her grandmother before her, and everyone who has stood on this ground and looked up at the enormous ordinary darkness, and found it beautiful, and terrifying, and entirely worth being under. It has held everything that has ever happened beneath it without intervening. It just accumulates the light and holds it a while, and then lets it go. I am going back in 11 days. The jolliff at my cousin's wedding last Saturday was fine. Not as good as everyone said. I said this at the table, and my mother gave me a look across the plate, and I said it was just an observation, and she said some observations are better saved for the right moment, and I said that was sound advice, and I tried to apply it, and she said she knew I did. And we looked at each other across the table in the late afternoon light of a city that 46 galactic species have recently spent 61 days revising their understanding of. The light was gold. It is always gold, here, at this hour. It has always been.
I had no stamp, Tiny. Tiny, shoot it, bro. I'm throwing flashy passes. Oh, Tiny. Lob. It's AI. That's easy. Every time. My guy's AI, so you have to catch these lobs. I'll throw it good. I'm not going to bed till 3 a.m., bro. Tiny, what the freak are you doing? That's me. What? You were right there for my recover, or for my help. He could shoot. Oh my gosh! Steal it! Is it win by 2? He's shining back door. You left the party like that?